The Old Forest, standing at the edge of Buckland, is one of the oldest and most mysterious places in Middle-earth, a remnant of an age before men or even elves wandered the world. Long before the Shire was settled by the hobbits, this ancient wood had already gained a fearsome reputation. It was said that the trees here could think, feel and remember, and in the thick shadows beneath their gnarled branches, strange and malevolent things were known to stir. For generations, the Old Forest had been a place of legend and terror, whispered about by firesides in hushed tones, a place that even the stout-hearted hobbits of Buckland feared to tread. Its dark canopy stood as a brooding sentinel over the land, a tangled mass of oak, holly and ash, twisted and interwoven as though shaped by the evil hands of nature. The light of day seemed to wither beneath the weight of its branches, leaving the forest floor in a permanent twilight. It was a place where the very air seemed heavy with old malice, as if the wood itself resented the passage of time and the coming of new outside life. To understand the true terror of the Old Forest, one must first realise that it was not just a gathering of old trees, but a living, sentient entity. The trees were aware, ancient and filled with deep-rooted hatred for all things that walked upon two legs. Long ago, in the Elder Days, the trees of the Old Forest had spread across the vast lands, untamed and wild. They were no ordinary trees. They were remnants of a primordial world, bound to the land by a will older than that of the hills. Over time, as the world changed and the powers of the elves and other creatures began to subdue the wild places, the trees of the Old Forest were driven back, hemmed in by the growing presence of the free peoples, particularly the hobbits of the Shire. But these trees remembered. The forest itself became a creature of spite and revenge, its heart filled with resentment for the axe and the plough. The hobbits of Buckland, though small in stature, had cleared great tracts of the forest when they founded their land, chopping down trees and shaping the earth to their liking. The trees responded by growing wilder, their branches reaching out as if to claim that which had been stolen. The paths through the Old Forest would shift like a snake slithering through tall grass, twisting and changing as soon as one of them turned their back. It was said that if you strayed too far from the main trail, the forest would close in around you, trapping you in its labyrinth of tangled roots and gnarled branches. Many who wandered into the heart of the Old Forest never returned. Even the Brandybooks, who lived closest to the forest, dared not venture far into its depths. They maintained the high hay, a tall, thick hedge separating Buckland from the forest, as much to keep the malevolent trees out as to mark the boundary of their own land. Yet these trees pressed against this barrier, leaning with malice, watching, waiting for the moment when the hedge would fail or a foolish soul would dare cross into their dark domain. There were stories passed down from hobbit to hobbit, generation after generation, of whispers carried on the wind in the Old Forest. On certain nights, when the wind blew from the east, hobbits living near the high hay could swear they heard voices in the rustling leaves, deep and guttural, like the mutterings of an ancient tongue long forgotten. These were the voices of the trees themselves, murmuring in the dark harmony, plotting their slow and creeping revenge on the world of the flesh and blood. Sometimes, a hobbit walking along the hedge would feel an unnatural chill, as if 1,000 unseen eyes were following their every move. The leaves above would rustle, though no breeze was blowing, and the ground beneath would feel soft and shifting, as if the earth itself was alive. Those brave enough to step into the Old Forest would often find their footsteps echoed by an unseen follower. Was it the wind, The trees, or was it something far older, far darker than even the forest itself could imagine? These were creatures of a different kind, filled with a strange and sinister consciousness. The hobbits claimed that the forest could hate, though what truly lurked within its dark green depths was far more complicated than simple malice. The trees held within them the memory of the world before the Shire, before even the hobbits came to Buckland, of a time when they had dominion over all things. Their anger was not that of a simple revenge. It was a deep-rooted bitterness at the loss of their power, at the diminishment of their ancient grandeur. And for those unfortunate souls who ventured into the forest, the experience was nothing short of a waking nightmare. The paths, if one could call them that, were deceptive. They appeared wide and welcoming at first, but would soon narrow, closing in with brambles and thorny bushes. The deeper one went, the more twisted the trees became, their roots like writhing snakes across the forest floor. Branches would sway without wind, stretching like fingers, sometimes seeming to grasp at a passer-by, ready to ensnare those who wandered too far. As the forest grew darker, the air became thick and suffocating, and the ground would shift as if alive. Of all the terrors lurking within the old forest, none was more feared than Old Man Willow. Ancient and malignant, this was no ordinary tree, but a creature of malevolent will. He was the oldest and most powerful of the trees, his roots reaching deep into the earth, his limbs stretching wide and powerful. It was said that Old Man Willow had dominion over much of the forest, and many believed it was his dark will that guided the paths, trapping those who dared to trespass. His heart was black with malice, and he possessed the power to lull unsuspecting travellers into a deep and dangerous sleep, using their magic to bend their minds to his will. His great gnarled trunks stood in a dark, shadowy glade by the Withywindle, where the trees seemed even more twisted and cruel than elsewhere. His roots stretched deep into the soil, causing the ground to shift and sink at his command. The hobbits spoke of times when people had sat beneath Old Man Willow, only to be swallowed by his gaping maw or crushed beneath his powerful limbs. When the hobbits Frodo, Sam and Pippin found themselves trapped by Old Man Willow, they nearly met their end. The great tree, having lured them to rest beside him, lashed out with his branches, pulling Pippin into a hollow in his trunk and trapping Merry with a suffocating grip. Frodo, left in horror, tried to resist, but even he felt the dark drowsiness creeping over him, as though the forest itself was trying to pull him into an eternal slumber. This is not merely a place on a map. It is a living, breathing thing, filled with ancient memories and ancient hate. It is a reminder that the world of Middle-earth is not one of simple good and evil, but a place filled with forgotten powers, dark and lingering, that once ruled the land in a time before memory, before the rise of dark lords. To enter the old forest is to enter the past, to step into a world where nature itself has turned against you, a world that remembers when trees were kings and mortals were nothing more than intruders with axes and fire. And so the forest remains, in the end, an unknowable force, brooding on the edge of the Shire, waiting for the day when it might once again reclaim that which was taken. And so it stands, in darkness, in silence, whispering with the wind, watching, waiting, and plotting its slow and creeping revenge on any who would cut it down.